Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the muddy boots of a medieval duelist, where your alarm clock is a nervous squire shaking you awake at 4 a.m. because someone insulted your horse's bloodline, and now you have to literally fight about it. You're about to discover that Hollywood's gleaming sword fights were actually more like aggressive hugging matches in tin cans. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without at least losing a finger or two. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The pre-dawn air bites through your linen undershirt as you sit up on your straw mattress, instantly aware that this might be your last morning. Your squire, barely 16 and trying to hide his trembling hands, has already laid out your clothes, not your armor yet. That comes later, but the specific garments required by law for anyone about to engage in trial by combat. You pull on the rough wool hose, noting how the church insisted these be undyed gray, symbolizing your state between innocence and guilt. The candle flame flickers as you wash your face in the pewter basin, the water so cold it makes your teeth ache. Medieval hygiene standards mean you're scrubbing with a mixture of ash and an animal fat that your grandmother swears by, though you suspect it just moves the dirt around rather than removing it. You catch your reflection in the polished metal mirror, a luxury your father won in his own duel 20 years ago, and wonder if you'll look this tired when they prop up your corpse later. Your stomach growls, but the fasting rules are strict. Nothing but bread and weak ale until after the combat, assuming you're still capable of chewing. The church decreed this particular suffering to ensure you enter the duel with a clear soul, though you suspect it's really to minimize the mess when someone inevitably vomits from nerves or a belly wound. Your squire offers you a crust of yesterday's bread, hard enough to chip a tooth, which you gnaw while he reads aloud from the dueling codes. The challenged party must present himself at the field no later than the third bell, he recites, voice cracking. Failure to appear results in automatic guilt and forfeiture of all lands and titles. You nod, though historians still argue whether these time restrictions were actually enforced or just used as convenient excuses to declare no-shows as cowards. One fringe scholar even claims the whole third bell thing was invented by monks who wanted to ensure duels didn't interfere with their morning prayers. You dress slowly, each garment carrying meaning. The white shirt represents purity of cause, ironic since you're about to attempt murder in front of the entire village. The red cross stitched on your chest marks you as a Christian seeking God's judgment, though you've noticed your opponent will wear the exact same symbol, which seems to defeat the purpose. Your boots must be soft leather with no metal buckles, because someone once killed an opponent with a weaponized shoe and ruined it for everyone. The chapel bells ring twice as you make your way through the narrow streets, your footsteps echoing off the timber-framed houses where shutters crack open and sleepy faces peer out. Word travels fast in a town of barely 2,000 souls, and everyone knows today's an entertainment schedule. You catch whispers of odds being offered, 3 to 1 against you, apparently, which stings more than it should. You enter the stone chapel where your opponent already kneels before the altar, his broad shoulders visible even through his cloak. The priest, Father Benedict, looks like he'd rather be anywhere else as he prepares the holy relics. These aren't the good relics they save for Easter, no splinters of the true cross today. Instead, you get St. Agatha's fingernail, supposedly, and a tooth that might have belonged to a minor apostle, or possibly just a regular dead person with good dental work. The ritual begins with you kneeling beside your enemy, close enough to smell the garlic and onion on his breath from last night's meal. You place your right hand on the yellowed skull of Saint Whoever while Father Benedict drones in Latin. The words wash over you, something about divine judgment and the flames of righteousness, but you're distracted by how your opponent's hand trembles slightly. Good. He's scared too. Do you swear before God and these witnesses that your cause is just? Father Benedict asks in the common tongue, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who's overseen too many of these ceremonies. You both answer, I do, in unison, which creates an awkward moment where you accidentally make eye contact. Historians still debate whether this simultaneous oath taking was intentionally designed to create doubt, since obviously God can't be backing both of you. The next part requires you to forgive each other for any past wrongs, which seems counterproductive given that you're about to try stabbing each other. You mumble the required words about Christian charity while mentally cataloging every offense this bastard has committed against you. He slept with your cousin's wife, spread rumors about your family's legitimacy, and, worst of all, claimed your mother's pottage recipe was stolen from his grandmother. Father Benedict produces the consecrated host, and this is where things get properly medieval. You must both consume the blessed wafer, but tradition holds that if you're lying about your cause, you'll choke on it. One chronicle from 1387 describes a knight who actually did choke and die right there in the chapel, though the skeptical modern historian in me wonders if someone just had a wheat allergy and very bad timing. The priest then reads the official charges, which in your case sound even pettier when spoken in a holy place. Robert of Westford does accuse Thomas of Brookside of unlawfully grazing 17 sheep upon his ancestral pasture lands. 17 sheep. You're potentially about to die over livestock that aren't even yours. They belong to Lord Pemberton, who's probably still in bed. Your opponent, Thomas. You suppose you should call him, since you might be killing him soon, starts his counter-accusation about property boundaries and something involving your grandfather's will. The legal tangles make your head spin, and you notice even Father Benedict's eyes glaze over. Medieval property law was intentionally complex, creating endless opportunities for disputes that could only be resolved by combat, since nobody could actually understand the documents. The strangest part comes next, the ritual humiliation. You must both strip to your undergarments and be searched for hidden charms, witchcraft tokens, or illegal weapons. 2 church wardens pat you down with the thoroughness of airport security, checking between your toes and behind your ears. Last month in London, they found a man with a paper talisman sewn into his armpit that allegedly made him invulnerable to iron. He lost the duel anyway, proving either the charm was fake or his opponent found a loophole. You stand there in your linen braise, goosebumps rising on your skin, while Thomas gets the same treatment. Someone in the gathered crowd whistles appreciatively, which earns them a glare from Father Benedict. The search reveals nothing more incriminating than a rabbit's foot in Thomas's shoe, technically not illegal, but definitely frowned upon. The final oath requires you to declare you've used no sorcery, made no deals with demons, and haven't employed any magical arts to ensure victory. The church added this bit after the infamous Winchester duel of 1356, where the winner later admitted he'd paid a witch to curse his opponent's sword arm. You speak the words clearly, though you did visit that wise woman last week who gave you a potion, but that was for your persistent cough, definitely not combat enhancement. Probably. Father Benedict sprinkles you both with holy water that's so cold you suspect he's kept it in the cellar overnight, just to add extra suffering. May God's will be revealed through your arms, he intones, which is ecclesiastical speak for, sort it out yourselves, we're just here to watch. The armoring chamber smells of oil, leather, and fear sweat from the dozens of men who've prepared for death within these walls. Your squire has already laid out each piece on the wooden trestle table, polished until you can see your increasingly pale face reflected in the steel. The Armorers Guild insisted on inspecting everything last night, checking for illegal modifications like hidden spikes or weakened joints designed to fail dramatically. You start with the arming doublet, a padded jacket that prevents the metal from rubbing your skin raw. Your squire, William, though you've been trying not to get too attached in case he's lacing up a dead man, helps you into it with practiced movements. The garment is stuffed with raw wool and horsehair, already damp with nervous perspiration from previous wearers. There's a rusty stain near the left armpit that everyone politely ignores. Hold still, my lord, William mutters as he begins with the sabatons, working from the feet up as tradition demands. The foot armor clicks into place with tiny buckles that his nimble fingers manage despite the trembling. Each sabaton weighs about 2 pounds, and you're already calculating how much metal you'll be carrying. The full harness will add nearly 60 pounds to your frame, which sounds manageable until you remember you'll be fighting for your life in it. The greaves come next, protecting your shins, followed by the polans for your knees. Medieval armor isn't the clunky tin can of popular imagination. Each piece articulates smoothly, though there's always a gap somewhere. Experienced duelists aim for these gaps, which is why you're wearing mail underneath at the joints. The mail is your grandfather's, links riveted rather than butted, because he survived 3 duels and you're hoping his luck transfers through metal. William straps on your cuisses, protecting your thighs, and you notice he's muttering prayers under his breath, not the official Latin ones, but the old words his grandmother taught him, the kind the church pretends don't exist. You don't stop him. At this point, you'll take any divine intervention available, orthodox or otherwise. The fald goes around your waist, a skirt of overlapping plates that protects your groin, arguably the most important piece given how many duels end with desperate low blows. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether the increasing elaborateness of groin protection throughout the 14th century reflects actual combat experience or just masculine anxiety. You suspect both. Your breastplate is a thing of beauty, even if it might become your death carapace. The Milanese armorer who made it insisted on adding decorative ridges that serve no protective purpose but look magnificent. The metal is cold against your arming doublet as William buckles the side straps, adjusting them to allow for breathing, but not so loose that a blade could slip through. You practice expanding your chest, feeling where the metal constrains your movement. Too tight? William asks, and you shake your head even though it is. Breathing is overrated compared to not getting stabbed. The backplate follows, and now you're encased in steel from neck to waist. The weight settles onto your hips and shoulders in a familiar way. You've trained in this armor for weeks, but it feels heavier today. The pauldrons protecting your shoulders go on next, asymmetrical because your right arm needs more mobility for sword work while your left will mostly hold a shield. This is assuming you get to choose your weapons, which depends on your social standing versus Thomas's. Since you're both minor nobles with roughly equivalent land holdings, you'll probably get swords. If one of you were a merchant, it would be axes. Peasants get clubs, which honestly might be worse, harder to die cleanly from a club. William starts on your arms, vambraces for the forearms, couters for the elbows, and rear braces for the upper arms. Each piece must overlap perfectly, leaving no gaps for a lucky thrust. Your left arm gets slightly heavier armor since it's your shield arm, though shield is optimistic. The judicial duel shields are deliberately small, about the size of a dinner plate, because the authorities want this over quickly. The gauntlets are the trickiest part. Too tight, and you can't grip your sword properly. Too loose, and they'll twist on impact. William slides them on, adjusting each finger plate individually. These are your second best pair because your best ones are currently with the armorer, who's adding extra knuckle protection after you saw what happened to Sir Edmund last month. He can only count to 7 now. Finally, the helmet. You've chosen a bassinet with a hinged visor, which gives better visibility than a great helm, but wants protection. The padding inside is fresh. William replaced it this morning, but it still smells of other men's terror. The visor clicks shut, and suddenly you're looking at the world through narrow eye slits. Your breathing echoes inside the metal, a hollow sound that will haunt your dreams if you survive to have any. Nearly done, my lord, William says, his voice muffled now. He's attaching your sword belt, though you won't get your actual weapons until you're in the arena. The belt must be blessed leather with no metal fittings that could be used as impromptu weapons. Someone always tries to get creative. You stand fully armored now, a steel scarecrow pretending to be invulnerable. William circles you, checking every strap and buckle one final time. He finds a loose rivet on your left couter and quickly hammers it tight. These are the details that save lives or end them if missed. The weapon master's tent sits at the edge of the dueling ground, guarded by 2 men-at-arms who look thoroughly bored with the whole affair. Inside, Master Roland presides over his deadly inventory like a merchant displaying silk, except his wares are designed to puncture organs rather than impress ladies. The negotiations here can take longer than the actual combat, especially when both parties bring lawyers. You duck through the tent flap, your armor clanking with each movement, to find Thomas already there with his second, arguing about blade length. The traditional rules state that weapons must be equal in reach and weight, but medieval measurements are more art than science. Is a Flemish foot the same as an English foot? Nobody really knows, which is why Master Roland keeps a collection of measuring sticks that all give different results. Ah, Robert of Westford, Master Roland greets you with the false cheer of a man who profits from others' quarrels. Come to select the instruments of God's judgment? He gestures to his collection laid out on wooden racks, swords, axes, maces, and even a few exotic weapons that nobody's quite sure how to use properly. There's a spiked chain that supposedly came from the Holy Land, though it looks more like something a creative blacksmith made after too much ale. The sword selection alone could fill a small armory. Long swords, arming swords, falchions, and even a few of those newer thrusting swords the Italians favor. Each has been inspected for balance, sharpness, and hidden weaknesses. Master Roland's reputation depends on providing fair weapons. One cracked blade during combat, and he'd never work again. Well, he'd probably also be murdered by the losing party's family, but professional reputation matters too. I propose matched longswords. Thomas's second announces, a reedy man named Pryor, who serves as the village's part-time lawyer when he's not managing Lord Pemberton's accounts. German pattern, 42 inches blade length, 2¾ pounds weight. It's a conservative choice, the vanilla option of judicial combat. No surprises, no advantages, just two men trying to perforate each other with very long knives. Your own second, your brother-in-law Martin, who still hasn't forgiven you for dragging him into this, examines the proposed swords. He tests the balance, flexes the blade, even sniffs the metal like he could detect substandard steel by scent. The pommels are different weights, he objects. This one's at least 2 ounces heavier. And so begins the tedious dance of weapon negotiation. Master Roland produces his scales, supposedly blessed by the Bishop of Winchester to ensure accuracy, though you notice they give different readings depending on which side you load first. The swords are weighed, measured, compared, rejected, and replaced with others. Someone produces a treatise on proper sword dimensions, written by a German master in 1389. But Thomas's second counters with a French manual from 1392 that contradicts everything. Perhaps axes, Master Roland suggests, after 20 minutes of sword debates. I have a matched pair from the famous smiths of Milan. He produces 2 beautiful weapons with crescent blades and steel hafts, looking more like art than instruments of death. Your brother-in-law immediately objects that the grain in one handle runs slightly diagonal, giving it a theoretical weakness that could manifest after precisely 247 strikes. According to some mathematical formula he probably just invented. The negotiations reveal the bizarre specifics of medieval combat law. Swords must be sharp enough to cut a silk veil dropped from 3 feet, but not so sharp they're considered unnatural. Axes can't have beards longer than a man's palm width, measured from the wrist crease to the middle fingertip. But whose palm? That starts another argument. Maces are allowed only if both combatants agree, and the spikes can't exceed 1 inch unless it's a Tuesday or something equally arbitrary that someone's ancestor decided centuries ago. What about those? Thomas points to a pair of war hammers with modest spikes on the reverse. It's an interesting choice. Hammers are better against armor, but require getting close, turning the duel into a wrestling match with metal accessories. Your brother in law starts to object, but you cut him off with a gesture. The hammers actually suit you. You've always been better at close combat than sword fencing, though admitting this feels like confessing a character flaw. Master Roland brightens. Excellent choice. These are from my personal collection, perfectly matched in every dimension. He launches into a story about how they were supposedly used in a famous duel between two knights in 1341, both of whom died simultaneously, which doesn't seem like a selling point, but apparently passes for romance in weapons dealer circles. The shields prove less contentious, small bucklers, about 14 inches across, just enough to deflect a blow if you're lucky, but not enough to hide behind. They're deliberately made this size because full shields would make duels last too long, and the crowd gets restless. There's an unspoken agreement among the nobility that judicial combats should conclude before lunch, whenever possible. But then Pryor raises a new objection. My client requests inspection of the armor for illegal modifications. This is purely a delaying tactic, but it's his right. You and Thomas must partially disarm, while officials check for spring-loaded blades, poison reservoirs, or other creative cheating methods. Last year in York, they found a man with sharpened armor edges, turning his entire body into a weapon. He still lost, but points for innovation. The inspection reveals nothing more sinister than Thomas's rabbit foot, still tucked in his boot, and your own small cloth bag of earth from your family's land sewn into your arming cap. Technically, these aren't weapons, just psychological aids, though Pryor makes a half-hearted argument that the rabbit's foot constitutes unnatural assistance. Even Master Roland rolls his eyes at that one. The great hall of Lord Pemberton's manor glows with the light of 100 candles, their smoke mixing with the aroma of roasted meats and nervous sweat. This reconciliation feast, mandatory for all judicial combatants, represents the Church's last attempt to prevent bloodshed through the time-honored tradition of awkward dinner conversation. You sit directly across from Thomas, close enough to count the broken veins in his nose, probably from too much wine, though tonight he's conspicuously avoiding the vintner's offerings. Lord Pemberton himself presides from the high table, looking deeply annoyed that his tenant's squabble has interrupted his hawking season. He's wearing his finest blue surcoat, the one with silver embroidery that costs more than your entire village produces in a year. Gentlemen, he begins, using the term loosely, the Church commands that you break bread together in the spirit of Christian fellowship. His tone suggests he'd rather be breaking your heads together. The first course arrives, a thin soup that tastes of cabbage and resignation. You and Thomas must share a single bowl, taking turns with the same spoon, because symbolism matters more than hygiene in medieval conflict resolution. He sips first, maintaining eye contact like a cat establishing dominance. The soup has been oversalted, possibly to encourage wine consumption and loose tongues, but you both stick to watered ale. Fine weather for killing, Thomas observes conversationally, passing you the spoon. It's still warm from his mouth, which feels unnecessarily intimate given tomorrow's agenda. You take your prescribed 3 sips, no more, no less, as specified in the reconciliation protocols, and taste garlic. Of course, he's been eating garlic. Psychological warfare comes in many forms. The hall fills with other diners, witnesses, family members, and various hangers on who wouldn't miss the social event of the season. Your wife sits at a lower table, steadfastly not looking at Thomas's wife, who's equally dedicated to studying her trencher. The women have their own complicated dynamic involving borrowed cooking pots never returned and disputes over market stall placement that honestly contributed more to this duel than any sheep ever did. Father Benedict stands to deliver the reconciliation sermon, which everyone pretends to hear while actually planning tomorrow's violence. He speaks of Cain and Abel, which seems counterproductive given how that ended, then pivots to the Good Samaritan, losing his narrative thread somewhere around the innkeeper's bill. Medieval sermons are like jazz. It's more about the journey than the destination. The main course arrives, an entire roasted pig, apple in mouth, skin crackling with fat. Tradition demands you and Thomas carve it together, each holding one side of the knife. This requires coordination that would be challenging between friends, let alone men planning mutual murder. You manage to hack off rough portions without actually stabbing each other, though there's a tense moment when the knife slips and you both freeze. Your grandfather fought my uncle in 1387, Thomas mentions, while sawing through a particularly tough bit of crackling, over a millstone, I believe. You nod, remembering the family story. They'd both survived, barely, and spent their remaining years arguing about who actually won. Medieval grudges are hereditary. You inherit them along with land and livestock. The side dishes include bread, which you must break and share, more symbolism, and various root vegetables boiled into submission. There's also a mysterious gray pudding that might contain blood, oats, or both. Noble cuisine focuses more on quantity than quality, operating on the principle that if you serve enough courses, something's bound to be edible. I hear you've been practicing with Master Guillaume, Thomas says, naming the French weapons instructor who recently set up shop in the market town. It's not exactly secret intelligence. Everyone knows everyone's business in a place this small, but the acknowledgement feels like a chess move. You counter by mentioning his visits to the shrine of Saint Christopher, patron of travelers and, conveniently, survivors. The wine arrives despite everyone's best efforts to avoid it. Lord Pemberton insists on a toast to justice, which could mean anything. You and Thomas must drink from the same cup, another symbolic gesture that mainly spreads diseases. The wine is imports from Gascony, better than you'd expect, with notes of blackberry and imminent death. Musicians begin playing, badly, in the gallery above. The songs are deliberately chosen to encourage reconciliation, ballads about forgiveness, brothers reunited, the foolishness of pride. One particularly tone deaf rendition of The Peaceful Night makes everyone wince in unison, creating the first genuine moment of unity all evening. Your son shows promise with a blade, Thomas offers, which is either a compliment or a threat about future generations continuing this feud. You respond that his daughter's embroidery won first prize at the Michaelmas Fair, equally ambiguous. This is how enemies make small talk. Every statement a potential weapon, every courtesy barbed. The feast drags on through 7 courses, each more elaborate and less appetizing than the last. There's a swan redressed in its feathers, which looks magnificent until you taste it and remember swans are essentially angry water chickens. The subtlety, a castle made of marchpane and sugar, arrives to general applause, though it collapses before anyone can appreciate the craftsmanship, perhaps a metaphor for something. Lord Pemberton rises for the final ritual. You and Thomas must swear before the assembled company that you've forgiven each other all past wrongs and will accept tomorrow's outcome as God's will. The words stick in your throat like the overcooked swan. Thomas speaks his part with equal reluctance, and you both know these oaths are worth less than the wax sealing them. As the evening ends, guests begin placing bets with varying degrees of discretion. The odds have shifted. You're now only 2 to 1 against, possibly because Thomas drank more wine than advisable. Your wife catches your eye and nods toward the door. Time to leave before someone suggests one more reconciliation toast, and this ends in a common brawl rather than properly sanctioned violence. The morning mist clings to the ground as you arrive at the designated field, a flat meadow just outside the town walls where the grass has been worn down by countless feet over generations of duels. The arena makers have been working since before dawn, transforming this ordinary pasture into a theater of judgment. Stakes driven into the earth mark the combat boundary, 60 feet square, large enough for maneuvering, but small enough that neither combatant can simply run away, though someone always tries. Father Benedict stands at the eastern edge, sprinkling holy water on the ground, while muttering Latin phrases that sound more like recipes than prayers. He's creating a sacred boundary, theoretically preventing demonic interference, though you suspect demons have better things to do than influence provincial property disputes. The holy water comes from the Jordan River, or so the church claims, though it looks suspiciously like the stuff from the village well that made everyone sick last summer. Carpenters hammer together the viewing platforms with the efficiency of men who do this regularly. The highest seats go to Lord Pemberton and his guests, naturally, followed by tiers for various social ranks down to standing room for peasants. Someone's already selling hot pies and ale from a cart, because medieval entrepreneurs never miss an opportunity. The smell of questionable meat mingles with sawdust and anticipation. They're using oak planks, your brother-in-law Martin observes, testing the construction with his boot. Last time they used pine, and the whole thing collapsed during the Hartworth duel, crushed a cheese merchant. He sounds wistful, though whether for the lost cheese or the excitement, you can't tell. The ground itself requires extensive preparation. Young boys with rakes smooth out molehills and fill rabbit holes that could trip a fighter. They scatter sand in strategic areas to prevent slipping on blood, a detail that makes your stomach clench. Two physicians set up their tent at the field's edge, laying out bone saws and cauterizing irons with disturbing enthusiasm. Medieval medical ethics are flexible about whose side they're on. They'll treat whoever can pay, assuming there's enough left to treat. You notice the crowd already forming. Despite the early hour, dueling days are like feast days, market days, and public executions rolled into one. Merchants hawk blessed talismans, guaranteed to ensure your chosen fighter's victory, though they're carefully selling equal numbers for both sides. A minstrel warms up his lute, composing verses about your brave deeds or ignoble death, depending on how the morning goes. The judicial officials arrive in a procession meant to convey gravitas, but mostly achieving comedy. The chief judge, Sir Reginald, can barely walk thanks to gout and must be carried in a chair by four struggling servants. His assistant carries the official seal and scrolls of legal precedent, dropping several in the mud. The third official's only job seems to be looking serious while holding a very large book nobody ever opens. Hear ye, the herald begins. Though everyone's already listening, let all present witness that this ground is hereby consecrated for trial by combat between Robert of Westford and Thomas of Brookside. He continues with a lengthy recitation of your respective crimes, genealogies, and legal rights, losing half the crowd by the third, whereas the ground consecration involves more ritual than organizing a royal wedding. 4 priests walk the perimeter, one at each cardinal direction, swinging censers that produce smoke thick enough to cure bacon. They're followed by altar boys carrying handles that keep getting blown out by the wind, requiring frequent relighting and disrupting the solemnity. One trips over his robe and face plants in the sand, which someone will definitely interpret as an omen. Lord Pemberton rises from his cushioned chair to address the crowd, mostly to remind everyone this is their fault for not settling this sensibly. Let no man interfere with God's judgment, he declares, which is rich coming from someone who tried to bribe you both to drop the matter last week. The bounds are sacred. Any who cross them during combat will face immediate execution. This is directed at family members who have a tendency to accidentally throw rocks at critical moments. The weapons are brought out in another ceremony involving far too many people. Master Roland personally carries each warhammer, displaying them to the crowd like a merchant showing his finest cloth. People lean forward to assess the craftsmanship, as if they could spot some minute advantage that would shift their bets. The shields follow, then various secondary implements that probably won't be used, but tradition demands. Daggers for mercy strokes, hooks for dragging bodies, that sort of cheerful equipment. A space must be cleared for the combatants to arm themselves in view of witnesses. 2 small tents, one at each end of the field, provide minimal privacy for final preparations. You can see Thomas entering his, followed by his squire and second. Your own tent awaits, a canvas structure that's seen better decades and smells like mildew and fear. The strangest part of the consecration is the animal sacrifice, a white cockerel whose main qualification seems to be looking symbolic. Father Benedict holds it aloft while intoning something about innocent blood, then passes it to his assistant for the actual killing part because he doesn't like getting his vestments dirty. The bird's demise is supposed to predict the duel's outcome based on which direction it runs while dying, but it just flops around randomly until everyone loses interest. More officials arrive: the marshal who'll enforce combat rules, two linesmen who'll watch for boundary violations, and a timekeeper whose job becomes relevant only if the fight continues past sunset. There's actually a provision for torch-lit evening combat, though that usually just results in both parties stumbling around blind until someone falls in a hole. The final consecration element involves burying items at the field's corners: a piece of bread representing Christ's body, a vial of wine and for his blood, salt for preservation of justice, and a coin for. Actually, nobody remembers what the coin represents, but they've always done it. One corner gets holy water, another gets oil, the third gets incense, and the fourth gets whatever's left over. It's theology by committee. Musicians play processional music as the crowd settles into position. The betting intensifies, with bookmakers calling odds and taking final wagers. Someone's opened a viewing position on a nearby roof and is charging admission. Children perch in trees despite their mother's protests. Dogs bark, babies cry, and vendors continue hawking food of dubious origin. The sacred ground is ready, waiting to absorb whatever blood, sweat, and other bodily fluids the morning's entertainment will provide. The judicial pavilion resembles a small courthouse that someone decided to construct from canvas and optimism. Inside, Lord Pemberton presides from a throne-like chair that his servants definitely didn't steal from the church, while clerks scratch away at parchments documenting every tedious detail of why you and Thomas want to bash each other's skulls in. The legal proceedings before a duel are somehow more torturous than the actual combat. At least fighting ends eventually. Sir Reginald, the chief judge, wheezes through the formal opening statements while everyone pretends his gout isn't making him grimace with each word. We gather to hear testimony in the matter of grazing rights, boundary stones, and, he squints at his notes, allegedly poisoned chickens. That last bit is news to you, but apparently Thomas added it to the complaint last night after his third cup of wine at the reconciliation feast. Your lawyer, Master Edmund, stands to present your case. He's wearing his finest black robes, which make him look like an especially prosperous crow, and carries enough legal documents to construct a small shelter. Your lordship, he begins, launching into a recitation of property law so complex that even he seems to lose track halfway through. Something about your great-grandfather's brother's widow's claim superseding the Treaty of 1342, unless it's a Tuesday. The crowd grows restless during the legal arguments. Medieval attention spans are calibrated for mystery plays and public floggings, not the finer points of inheritance law. Someone starts a dice game in the back rows until a guard confiscates the dice, then joins the game himself. A woman sells roasted chestnuts despite repeated warnings about commercial activity during judicial proceedings. Thomas's lawyer, Pryor, counters with his own mountain of documentation. He produces a charter supposedly signed by William the Conqueror, granting those disputed lands to Thomas's ancestors, though the ink looks suspiciously fresh. This sparks a heated debate about document authentication that involves three experts, a lengthy discussion of seal wax composition, and someone's grandmother who claims to remember when the original was signed, despite being clearly no older than 40. Furthermore, Pryor continues, sensing he's losing the audience, my client has witnesses to Robert's trespass. This perks up the crowd. Witnesses mean drama, possibly perjury, definitely entertainment. The first witness, a shepherd named Watt, takes the stand looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, possibly because both you and Thomas employ him seasonally. Watt's testimony is a masterpiece of rural diplomacy. Yes, he saw sheep on the disputed land. Whose sheep? Well, sheep all look alike, don't they? Were they Thomas's 17 sheep specifically? Could have been. Could have been 16 or 18. Numbers are tricky. After 10 minutes of this, Lord Pemberton threatens to have Watt flogged for wasting time, which finally produces a definitive statement. Them was definitely sheep, your lordship. Your witnesses fare no better. Old Margaret swears she saw Thomas's son moving boundary stones at midnight, though under questioning she admits it might have been his cousin, or possibly a large badger. Her eyesight isn't what it used to be. She does helpfully add that Thomas's wife once gave her a potion that turned her cow's milk sour, which has nothing to do with land rights, but feels important to share. The testimony grows increasingly bizarre. Someone claims the disputed field is cursed because a witch was burned there in 1298, though the records show she was actually acquitted and opened a successful brewing business. Another witness insists the land belongs to neither of you, but to the fairy folk, earning him immediate ejection and possible examination for heresy. Master Edmund introduces physical evidence, a boundary stone allegedly from Roman times, proving your family's ancient claim. Pryor counters with his own Roman stone that contradicts yours entirely. Historians still argue whether either stone is genuinely Roman or just old rocks with suspicious chisel marks added last week. The judges examined both with great ceremony before concluding they're definitely stones. The legal precedents cited become increasingly obscure. Someone references a case from 1157 where two knights fought over a windmill that didn't exist yet. Another brings up the infamous pig trial of 1266, though its relevance to sheep grazing remains unclear. At one point, both lawyers are shouting competing Latin phrases that might be legal terminology or Catholic dinner prayers. Lord Pemberton's patience finally snaps when Pryor attempts to introduce a 2-hour dissertation on Anglo-Saxon property law. Enough, he roars, sending his gout into fresh spasms. I've heard sufficient evidence to conclude that you're both idiots, and this matter can only be resolved through combat. May God have mercy on your souls, because I certainly don't. The formal charges are read one final time for the record. The clerk, who's been drinking steadily from a wineskin he thinks nobody's noticed, manages to reverse several key names and accidentally accuses you of stealing your own sheep. Nobody bothers correcting him. The paperwork's just a formality anyway, since one of you will be dead by noon. Both parties must swear final oaths that they've presented truthful testimony, which everyone does with straight faces, despite the preceding circus. You kiss the Bible, noting it's the same one Watt swore on before delivering his monument to evasion. Thomas follows suit, though he holds the book upside down, which the crowd interprets as either divine judgment or simple illiteracy. The judges retire to deliberate, though everyone knows they're just sharing that wineskin and complaining about their various ailments. They return after exactly long enough to maintain appearances, and Sir Reginald wheezes out the verdict everyone expected. Let God's judgment through arms determine the truth of this matter. The crowd cheers, finally getting to the good part. The lawyers pack up their documents, Master Edmund patting your shoulder with the air of a man who's done his billable duty. Pryor whispers something to Thomas that makes him go pale, probably reminding him about payment. The judges hobble off to their viewing platform, ready to watch the consequences of their decision while maintaining plausible deniability about encouraging violence. The herald's voice rings across the field as he explains the combat rules with the enthusiasm of someone who's memorized them but never actually seen blood. The duel shall continue until first blood is drawn, he announces, then pauses dramatically, unless both parties agree to fight outrance to the uttermost. The crowd perks up at this possibility, though you and Thomas have already agreed to the first blood option, much to everyone's disappointment. They came for a death, not a scratch. First blood itself is a surprisingly complex concept in medieval jurisprudence. Does blood from biting your own tongue count? What about a nosebleed from exertion? The herald clarifies, blood must flow from a wound caused by your opponent's weapon, visible to the judges from their platform, and sufficient to stain a white cloth pressed against it. He produces said cloth, pristine linen, that probably cost more than your monthly income, waving it like a surrender flag. Furthermore, he continues, while the crowd grows restless, blood drawn below the belt does not count unless it results in immediate collapse. This rule exists because of the infamous Thornbury duel of 1389, where Sir Edgar claimed victory after slightly nicking his opponent's toe. The subsequent 40-minute argument about whether toes counted as honorable targets led to oddly specific regulations. Your brother-in-law Martin leans over to whisper, "Remember, if you draw blood from his face, it counts double for honor, but might escalate to death." This is technically true, but practically stupid. Aiming for the face means exposing your own, and Thomas has longer arms. Medieval combat rules are full of these risk-reward calculations that sound reasonable until you're actually holding a warhammer. The marshal, a scarred veteran named Sir Roderick, who lost an eye in his own judicial duel 20 years ago, takes over to explain the boundaries. Any man who steps outside the stakes forfeits immediately. He demonstrates by walking the perimeter, his missing eye giving him a perpetual skeptical expression. Any man who drops his weapon may retrieve it, but his opponent is not obliged to wait. Translation: If you drop your hammer, expect to get brained while bending over. Should both men fall, and neither can rise within a count of 30, the judgment is considered null. This produces groans from the betting crowd, who hate draws more than they hate their in laws. The counting is done by the timekeeper, a nervous clerk who practices aloud. 1 Holy Mary, 2 Holy Mary, ensuring each count takes exactly the time to mutter a quick prayer, though whether for the fighters or himself remains unclear. The weapon rules are even more Byzantine. No striking with the pommel unless both weapons are lost. No grappling unless both men agree through clear verbal declaration. No biting, gouging, or fish hooking. That last term puzzles the crowd until Sir Roderick demonstrates with disturbing enthusiasm on his assistant, hooking fingers into the corner of the man's mouth. Everyone winces. If a man's armor fails through no fault of combat, the fight pauses for repair. This covers straps breaking or plates falling off, but not deliberate damage. There's a lengthy subclause about what constitutes equipment failure versus combat damage, illustrated by the case of Sir Pembroke, who claimed his opponent's sword breaking was equipment failure rather than the result of being hit very hard. He lost the argument and most of his left ear. Thomas's second raises a procedural question about helmet visibility, sparking a 10-minute debate about whether lifting your visor to see better counts as presenting an unarmored target or necessary adjustment, and the judges huddle, consulting precedents from the last century, before concluding that visors may be raised between exchanges, but not during active combat, which helps nobody since determining when combat is active requires another set of rules. The blood-drawing implements get their own regulations. Your war hammers are inspected again to ensure they haven't been secretly sharpened since yesterday's selection. The spike ends are measured exactly 4 inches, no more, no less. Too long and they're assassination tools, too short and they won't penetrate armor. Someone once tried to argue that a sharp hammer was actually more merciful, ensuring clean wounds rather than messy crushing. They changed their mind after experiencing the alternative. Should blood be drawn simultaneously? The herald reads from an increasingly lengthy scroll. The judges will determine whose blow landed first based on witness testimony. And given that witnesses include your respective families, drunk townspeople, and at least one person who's been taking bets on both sides, this seems optimistic. There's a provision for consulting neutral observers, though finding someone truly neutral in a town this small is like finding a virgin in a brothel, theoretically possible, but highly unlikely. The mercy rules are explained with delicate euphemism. Should one combatant be rendered helpless, his opponent may offer quarter. The herald doesn't mention that helpless usually means lying in a pool of their own fluids, or that quarter is often refused out of pure spite. There's also the awkward matter of the mercy stroke. If someone's mortally wounded, but not yet dead, their opponent is technically obligated to finish them cleanly. It's considered the chivalrous thing to do, like putting down a horse with a broken leg, except the horse didn't insult your mother. Special circumstances merit their own subclauses. If lightning strikes during combat, it's considered divine intervention, and both parties must accept the outcome as God's will. If either man vomits from nerves, the fight continues unless they slip in it, which counts as environmental hazard. If spectators interfere, the guilty party faces immediate execution, though catching them first proves challenging when the entire crowd surges forward. The final rule is the most controversial. No combat may extend past sunset. If neither man has drawn blood by then, both are declared guilty. This seems harsh until you realize the alternative is fighting in the dark, which historically ends with both combatants accidentally stabbing judges, spectators, or themselves. One memorable duel in 1367 continued by torchlight until both knights fell in the same hole, broke their legs, and had to be carried off while arguing about who fell first. The medical tent reeks of vinegar, burned herbs, and the kind of optimism that comes from not an understanding infection. Master Hugh, the senior surgeon, proudly displays his tools on a blood-stained table that hasn't been cleaned since the last duel, or possibly the one before that. His assistant, a boy who looks too young to be trusted with anything sharper than a spoon, grinds herbs with a mortar and pestle, creating dust clouds that make everyone sneeze. Gentlemen, Master Hugh addresses you and Thomas during the mandatory medical briefing. Should either of you require my services, rest assured I have studied at the finest universities in Paris. He doesn't mention he was expelled for grave robbing, though everyone knows his medical license, prominently displayed, has suspicious scratch marks where someone else's name used to be. The bone saw gleams with recent sharpening, its teeth designed to bite through limbs with minimal passes. The key, Master Hugh explains with disturbing enthusiasm, is speed. A clean amputation within 30 heartbeats prevents the worst bleeding. His assistant nods sagely while mixing a poultice that appears to be equal parts cobwebs, honey, and something that might be dirt or dried blood. You examine the cauterizing irons heating in a brazier, their ends shaped into various patterns. One looks like a cross. For blessed healing, Master Hugh notes, while another resembles a crescent moon, for wounds received under lunar influence. The medical theory behind this escapes you, but then most medieval medicine operates on principles that sound like someone made them up while drunk. For gut wounds, he continues, producing a needle that could double as a small sword, we sew with silk thread soaked in holy water and wine. The wine is supposedly for purification, though you suspect it's really because surgeons work better slightly tipsy. The holy water comes from the same dubious source as Father Benedict's, meaning your intestines would be stitched with thread soaked in essentially pond water. Thomas asks about pain management, earning a laugh from Master Hugh. Pain purifies the soul, but if you insist, he produces a leather-wrapped bottle, DUEL, hemlock, opium, henbane, and bryony mixed with wine and bile. It's essentially poison that hopefully knocks you unconscious before it kills you. Most fighters prefer to scream through the procedures rather than risk never waking up. The assistant demonstrates wound packing using a surprisingly realistic pig's leg with a deep gash. He stuffs it with linen soaked in egg whites, explaining how this prevents bad humors from entering. The fact that eggs rot in warm conditions doesn't seem relevant to their medical theory. They also have moss, specifically gathered from skulls in the cemetery, because apparently regular moss lacks the necessary death essence for proper healing. For head wounds, Master Hugh says, tapping his own skull with disturbing force, we have the trepanning kit. He shows you a collection of drills that look more suited to carpentry than surgery. Releasing pressure from evil spirits trapped in the brain often saves lives. The survival rate for medieval brain surgery hovers around miraculous if it happens, but he's optimistic about his technique involving prayers and a steady hand. The bloodletting equipment gets special attention. Should you survive but suffer from excess choler, we'll balance your humors. This involves razors, cups, and leeches kept in a jar that hasn't been changed recently enough. The leeches look sluggish, overfed from previous patients. Master Hugh assures you they're from the finest swamps, as if leech terroir matters when they're draining your life force. Arrow wounds require special treatment. The assistant pipes up, eager to demonstrate knowledge. This seems irrelevant to a hammer duel until he explains that the extraction principles apply to any deep penetration. He shows various tools designed to grip and pull, each looking more like torture implements than medical equipment. One has teeth that expand inside the wound, grabbing whatever they find and hopefully not taking half your organs with them. The herbal preparations fill an entire corner: feverfew for inflammation, willow bark for pain, wormwood for infection, and dozens of others with properties ranging from genuinely helpful to actively harmful. Master Hugh's personal favorite is a paste made from ground beetles, mercury, and crushed pearls, which he claims cures everything from wounds to melancholy. The mercury explains why most of his long-term patients develop mysterious tremors. Should you take a blow to the stones, Master Hugh says with unexpected delicacy, we have special protocols. These involve cold compresses, prayer, and a mysterious tincture that he refuses to describe, but assures you works wonders. Thomas winces at the thought, unconsciously adjusting his stance. Groin injuries in combat are common enough that there's an entire medical treatise dedicated to them, illustrated with diagrams that make everyone uncomfortable. The tooth extraction tools seem out of place until Master Hugh explains that jaw strikes often shatter teeth, requiring immediate removal to prevent choking. His pelican-shaped extractors could pull a tooth from an unwilling horse, which might be necessary given how hard it is to open a semi-conscious man's mouth. The assistant helpfully mentions they also serve to remove teeth that have been knocked down the throat, though the survival rate for that procedure is optimistically low. For the French disease, Master Hugh begins, then catches himself. Well, that's unlikely from combat, but we're prepared for all contingencies. The mercury treatments for syphilis sit next to the wound care supplies, a reminder that medieval medicine doesn't clearly distinguish between battle injuries and bedroom misadventures. Both involve bodily fluids and regret. The strangest equipment is saved for last: a collection of amulets, blessed rings, and small scrolls with healing prayers. These work best when combined with traditional treatment, Master Hugh admits, hedging his bets between science and superstition. One amulet supposedly prevents wound fever, while another encourages proper scabbing. There's even a small piece of unicorn horn, which is definitely just narwhal tusk, but commands premium prices from desperate patients. As you leave the medical tent, the assistant calls out cheerfully, "We'll keep the water boiling and the saws sharp." It's meant to be reassuring, but achieves the opposite effect. Thomas looks as green as you feel. The medical preparations are ready, such as they are, waiting to either save your life or finish what your opponent started. The crowd presses against the rope barriers like cattle at market day, their combined breath creating clouds in the cool morning air. You can smell them from 50 feet away, unwashed bodies, ale-soaked breath, and the particular stench of excitement that comes from watching potential death. The guards struggle to maintain order, using spear butts to push back the most enthusiastic spectators who seem to think getting splattered with combat blood brings good luck. 3-1 on Thomas, a bookmaker shouts, adjusting odds based on some imperceptible shift in the crowd's mood. Fresh odds, taking wagers on first blood location, face pays double, limbs triple, groin gets you 5-1. The specificity is disturbing, but people queue up with their copper pieces, treating your potential maiming like a harvest festival game. Children perch on their fathers' shoulders, mothers having given up on shielding innocent eyes. One boy, maybe 7 years old, waves a wooden sword and declares he'll challenge whoever wins, earning laughs and a clip around the ear. The real education happens at events like these. Forget the monastery schools. Nothing teaches life lessons quite like watching your neighbors try to kill each other over sheep. The ale sellers work the crowd with practiced efficiency, watering their product just enough to maximize profit without causing riots. Penny a cup, watch the blood flow better with ale in your belly. The logic is questionable, but medieval marketing doesn't require accuracy. Someone's also selling pieces of St. George's lance, which look suspiciously like whittled chair legs, guaranteed to protect loved ones from similar fates. A fight breaks out in the eastern section between Thomas's cousins and your brother's friends. Something about pre-existing debts complicated by today's wagers. The guards wade in half-heartedly, more interested in placing their own bets than maintaining order. The scuffle ends when someone mentions the fighters are cousins on their mothers' sides, making the conflict technically incestuous and therefore embarrassing. "I've got the winner's tooth right here." An enterprising fraud displays a bloody molar, claiming prophetic powers let him extract it from the future victor. The tooth probably came from last week's public flogging victim, but several people pay to touch it anyway. Medieval logic: if you're stupid enough to believe it, you deserve the poorer for it. The prostitutes work the edges of the crowd, recognizing that violence makes men either amorous or desperate for life-affirming activities. Mad Margaret, who's neither mad nor named Margaret, but maintains the brand for business reasons, offers special rates for combat widows, showing the kind of entrepreneurial thinking that would be admirable in other circumstances. A minstrel attempts to start a ballad about the combat that hasn't happened yet, getting the names wrong and inventing heroic deeds from whole cloth. Brave Robert the Bold, defender of ancient rights. Doesn't sound like you, but accuracy matters less than rhythm. He's already working out rhymes for various death scenarios, prepared for any outcome. The nobles in their raised platform maintain a pretense of dignity while gossiping furiously. Lady Pemberton whispers to her sister about how Thomas's wife already has her eye on the blacksmith if widowhood arrives. The sister counters that your wife has been pricing passage to London, suggesting confidence in either your victory or her escape plans. Marriage is complicated when judicial combat is a viable dispute resolution method. He's favoring his left side, someone shouts, pointing at you during your warm up movements. This sparks furious recalculation among bettors, though you're actually just adjusting an uncomfortable strap. The crowd reads omens in everything, the way you scratched your nose, uncertainty, how Thomas yawned, overconfidence or poor sleep, the direction a bird flew overhead, completely irrelevant, but interpreted as divine commentary. The pickpockets have their best day of the year, working through distracted spectators with nimble fingers. One gets caught lifting a merchant's purse and receives instant mob justice, beaten senseless and tossed over the barrier into the combat area. The marshal orders him dragged away, muttering about maintaining the sacred ground's purity, though blood from his broken nose has already stained the sand. Food vendors run out of meat pies suspiciously quickly, suggesting yesterday's mystery meat was indeed mystery. The backup option is bread so hard it could serve as weapons, though people gnaw it anyway. Someone's roasting chestnuts despite the fire hazard, while another entrepreneur sells cooling cloths that are just wet rags at inflated prices. A section of university students, identifiable by their clerical robes and superior attitudes, debates the finer points of judicial combat law loud enough for everyone to hear their education. They're taking notes, probably for some tedious treatise on violence as legal remedy in provincial England. One sketches the scene with charcoal, making you look considerably more heroic than reality suggests. The village idiot, though calling him that seems mean since he's actually quite clever when sober, performs crude puppetry with straw dolls, reenacting the fight with alternative endings. In his version, you both realize the futility of violence and open a joint sheep farming venture. It's sweet, but misses the point of deeply embedded generational grudges. Place your final bets, the bookmakers cry, as the marshal signals preparation for combat. The crowd surges forward one last time, a living wall of expectation and bloodlust. Mothers lift children higher, ensuring they'll have nightmares for weeks. Veterans of previous duels share expertise about which angles provide the best spatter patterns. Someone starts a prayer circle, though it's unclear which combatant they're supporting or if they're just praying for entertainment value. Their Latin is atrocious, accidentally asking God to bless the sheep rather than the shepherds, but intent probably matters more than grammar in divine petitions. The energy shifts as weapons are brought forward, crowd noise dropping to an anticipatory rumble, faces press against barriers, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, like baby birds awaiting feeding. They've come for blood, justice, entertainment, or all three mixed into the uniquely medieval cocktail of sanctioned violence. The crowd is ready. The question is, are you? The moment arrives with surprising mundanity. No thunderclap, no divine sign, just the marshal dropping his white baton and stepping quickly aside. You and Thomas circle each other in the sand, war hammers held in middle guard, both realizing that theoretical combat training feels very different when your opponent genuinely wants to cave in your skull. The crowd's roar fades to white noise as your world narrows to the man trying to kill you over grazing rights. Thomas moves first, a tentative swing that you block easily with your buckler, the impact jarring up your arm. The hammers are heavier than in practice, or maybe fear adds weight. He's testing your reflexes, looking for patterns, the same way you're studying his footwork. His stance is classical, learned from the same fighting masters who taught you, which means you each know what the other should do next. The sand is already scuffing under your feet, making footing treacherous. You faint high, watching him raise his shield predictably, but don't commit to the low strike that should follow. Good thing. He's ready with a counter that would have caught your extended arm. First blood could come from something that simple, that stupid, and you'd spend your remaining years known as the man who lost a duel in the opening exchange. Come on then, someone shouts from the crowd, impatient with the careful probing. They want wild swings and dramatic clashes, not this careful chess match. You oblige with a full force overhead strike that Thomas catches on his hammer's haft, the metal ringing like cathedral bells. The vibration numbs your hands through the gauntlets, and you realize this will be as much about endurance as skill. Thomas tries a thrust with the spike end, aiming for the gap beneath your arm. You twist away, but the point catches and scrapes along your breastplate, leaving a bright scratch in the metal. An inch to the left, and it would have found the joint. The crowd gasps at the near miss, already getting their money's worth. You respond with a horizontal swing he has to leap back from, your hammer whistling through empty air. The real fight begins as you both abandon caution. Thomas charges, trying to overwhelm you with sheer aggression. You give ground, blocking frantically as his hammer falls like a smith working iron. Your buckler takes a hit that bends the rim, another that cracks the wood beneath the metal facing. His strategy is clear: destroy your defense, then take his time with the killing blow. You duck under a wild swing and finally land your first real hit, hammering into his thigh armor. The plate holds, but the force drops him to one knee. You raise your weapon for a finishing strike, but he rolls aside with surprising agility for a man in 60 pounds of steel. Your hammer hits sand, spraying grit into the air, and his return strike catches your helmet, setting your ears ringing like Sunday bells. Now you're both breathing hard, circling again with more respect. Sweat runs into your eyes, stinging and blurring vision. The padding under your armor is soaked through, chafing with each movement. This is the part they don't mention in heroic tales: how quickly exhaustion sets in, how heavy your arms become, how desperately you want to just sit down and rest. Thomas tries something unexpected, throwing his buckler at your face. It's not technically illegal. The rules say nothing about projectile shields, but it's definitely unsporting. You bat it aside with your hammer, leaving yourself open for his follow-up strike. The spike punches through your pauldron, not deep enough to reach flesh, but tangling in the metal. For a moment, you're connected by his weapon, dancing awkwardly as he tries to wrench it free, and you try to trap it. The wrestling match everyone predicted finally happens. You drop your hammer, no choice with his weapon stuck in your shoulder, and grab his arms. He does the same, and suddenly you're grappling like drunkards outside a tavern. The crowd loves it, cheering as you strain against each other. Someone yells advice about foot placement that would be helpful if you weren't busy trying not to die. You hook Thomas's leg and send him sprawling, but he drags you down too. Now you're rolling in the sand like children, except children don't usually wear armor or try to gouge each other's eyes. Your visor is pressed against his, close enough to see his bloodshot eyes through the slits. His breath comes in gasps that fog the metal between you. This is combat at its ugliest. No grace, no skill, just desperate struggling. Somehow you end up on top, pinning his arms with your knees. Your hammer is somewhere in the sand, but his is still tangled in your pauldron. You grab the haft and try to twist it free, hoping to turn his own weapon against him. He bucks like an angry horse, nearly throwing you off, but exhaustion is making him sloppy. You can feel him weakening, the fight draining out of him like water from a punctured skin. Then his knee finds your groin in a strike that armor can't fully protect against. The pain is exquisite, nauseating, the kind that makes you see colors that don't exist. You roll off him, curled around your agony, dimly aware he's struggling to rise. The crowd makes sympathetic noises. Every man present just crossed his legs in sympathy. Even some of the women wince. Thomas gains his feet first, retrieving his hammer with movements that suggest his own exhaustion. You force yourself up, using your hammer as a crutch, trying not to vomit in your helmet. He advances slowly, raising his weapon for what should be the finishing blow. Your shield is gone, your body screams protests, and you can barely see through sweat and pain. This is how it ends, not with heroic defiance, but barely able to stand, defeated by a knee to the stones. But Thomas hesitates, hammer wavering. Perhaps he's remembering your neighbors who'll have to live beside each other if you both survive. Perhaps he's simply too tired to swing properly, or perhaps he's waiting for you to yield, to end this without bloodshed. The moment stretches between you like taut wire, the crowd holding its breath, everyone waiting to see who breaks first. The hesitation costs Thomas dearly, while he wavers between mercy and murder. You find some reserve of strength born from desperation and too many years of petty disputes. Your hammer swings up in an arc that catches him under the chin of his helmet, snapping his head back with a sound like a door slamming. He staggers, arms windmilling, and you follow with a thrust that finds the gap where his breastplate meets his fald. The spike doesn't penetrate deeply. The mail beneath catches most of it, but it draws blood. You can see the dark stain spreading across the links, and more importantly, so can the judges. Thomas drops his hammer, hands going to his belly, and for a horrible moment, you think you've killed him. Then he speaks, muffled by his helmet. Enough, Christ's wounds, enough. The marshal rushes forward, white baton raised. Hold, blood has been drawn. God's judgment is rendered. You want to collapse right there, but that would undermine the victory. Instead, you stand swaying like a tree in a storm while officials verify the wound. They press the white cloth against Thomas's mail, and it comes away red. First blood, officially witnessed, legally binding. You've won the right to graze sheep on land that might not even support them. The crowd erupts in mixed cheers and groans, depending on their wagers. Money changes hands with the speed of experienced gamblers already calculating odds for the next entertainment. Someone throws a half eaten apple that bounces off your helmet, unclear whether in celebration or protest. You're too exhausted to care either way. Thomas is helped away by his seconds, walking under his own power but leaning heavily on Pryor. The wound isn't serious. You can tell by how he's cursing rather than praying, but it'll need stitching. You'll probably pass him at Master Hugh's tent. Two idiots bleeding for principles you can barely remember through the adrenaline haze. Lord Pemberton rises from his cushioned seat, looking deeply irritated at having to render judgment. Robert of Westford has proved his cause through trial by combat. The disputed lands are his by right of arms and God's will. He pauses, then adds with obvious displeasure, the sheep may graze where they will, within reason, court costs to be split between both parties. Of course there are court costs. Victory in medieval law is never free. You'll be paying for the privilege of nearly dying for months, including the judge's fees, the marshal's time, the ground rental, and probably the blessed cloth that verified your victory. Thomas will pay too, adding financial insult to physical injury. Your wife pushes through the crowd, her face unreadable. She doesn't run to embrace you, that would be undignified, but walks with measured steps that suggest she's been holding her breath since dawn. You look terrible, she says when she reaches you, which is probably true. Can you walk? You nod. The walking seems optimistic. Your legs shake with exhaustion. Your groin still throbs from Thomas's knee, and there's definitely something wrong with your left shoulder where the pauldron got punctured. But you walk, because victors don't get carried unless they're dead, and sometimes not even then. The path to the medical tent passes through a gauntlet of well-wishers, critics, and people who want to touch you for luck. Your armor bears new scratches and dents that Master Roland will charge handsomely to repair. The hammer feels impossibly heavy in your hand, its head caked with sand and what might be blood or might just be rust. Master Hugh greets you with professional cheer. Ah, the victor. Let's see what damage you've accumulated for God and sheep. His assistant is already working on Thomas in the corner, stitching the belly wound with enthusiasm that suggests he doesn't get much practice on living patients. Thomas waves weakly, a gesture somewhere between greeting and obscene suggestion. The examination reveals a catalog of minor injuries, bruised ribs, strained muscles, a magnificent purple bloom spreading across your groin, various cuts and abrasions from the wrestling, nothing that won't heal, though you'll be pissing blood for a week and walking like a grandfather until the swelling goes down. Master Hugh seemed almost disappointed by the lack of dramatic wounds. You fought well, Thomas calls out, while the assistant accidentally jabs him with the needle. Bastard. It's unclear whether he means you or the medical treatment, possibly both. The strange camaraderie of shared violence settles between you. Two fools who beat each other senseless over sheep neither of you actually own. Outside, the crowd disperses with the particular energy of people who've seen blood, but not enough death. They'll talk about this for weeks, embellishing details, arguing about moments none of them saw clearly. By next month, the story will involve three men and a bear. By next year, it'll be a tale of ancient honor defended against terrible odds. You sit on a bench while Master Hugh's assistant removes your armor, each piece revealing new bruises like unwrapping the world's worst gift. Your arming doublet is soaked with sweat and blood, mostly yours. Hopefully, everything hurts in that specific way that promises worse tomorrow, when the adrenaline fully fades and your body tallies the complete bill. The legal clerks arrive with documents to sign because medieval bureaucracy never rests. You make your mark with a shaking hand, officially acknowledging victory and accepting the lands, the sheep rights, and the extensive fees. Thomas signs his own papers, transferring rights he'd inherited from an uncle who probably started this whole mess by moving a boundary stone in 1385. The wounds should heal cleanly if you avoid strenuous activity, Master Hugh advises, which is hilarious considering you need to help with the harvest starting tomorrow. He prescribes a tincture of willow bark for pain and a poultice of questionable composition for the bruises. The bill he presents would buy a good horse, but arguing seems unwise when he's holding bone saws. The strangest subset of medieval combat law involves the rare but legally recognized occasions when women participate in judicial duels. You learn about these peculiar arrangements from Master Edmund, your lawyer, who regales you with the details while you recover from your own combat. He seems to think historical legal precedents make excellent entertainment for the wounded, which says something about lawyers that transcends centuries. In the German territories, he explains with unseemly enthusiasm, they've developed quite specific protocols for when a woman must fight a man. The scenario usually involves accusations of rape, assault, or property disputes where no male relative can champion the woman's cause. Rather than deny her legal recourse, the courts created elaborate rules to level the playing field, though their ideas of fairness would make a modern observer laugh or cry. The man must stand in a pit dug to his waist, one arm tied behind his back, wielding a club no longer than his forearm. The woman stands on the ground level, free to move, armed with a sling containing a rock wrapped in cloth, essentially a medieval flail. She wears a special tunic that prevents tripping but offers no protection. He gets 3 clubs in case she breaks them. She gets 3 rocks in case she misses. It's equality through engineered absurdity. There was a famous case in 1428, Master Edmund continues, producing a manuscript with disturbing illustrations. Margaret of Augsburg accused Hans the miller of assaulting her virtue. He demanded trial by combat rather than face hanging. The pictures show a woman dancing around a hole while a man flails desperately with his tiny club, looking like the world's most violent garden mole. The positioning supposedly compensates for differences in reach and strength. The man can pivot in his hole, but can't pursue, while the woman must come close enough to strike, but can retreat freely. Historians still argue whether this actually balanced anything or just created a different kind of unfair fight. The survival rates suggest nobody really won these encounters, just different degrees of losing. You wonder aloud what happens if the woman falls into the pit, which apparently occurred regularly. Then it becomes wrestling, Master Edmund says cheerfully, and usually ends badly for everyone. The manuscripts describe ungainly struggles where both parties often drowned in the mud that accumulated from their thrashing, turning judicial combat into accidental mutual execution. The witness accounts he shares are bizarre beyond belief. One describes a woman who trained for months with shepherds who taught her slinging techniques, arriving at the duel able to knock apples off trees at 30 paces. Her opponent, expecting an easy victory against female weakness, took a rock to the temple in the first exchange and never recovered consciousness. The legal scholars debated whether this counted as divine judgment or just good aim. In France, they tried a different approach. Your lawyer continues, warming to his subject. Equal weapons, but the woman got a champion if she could afford one. This created a peculiar economy where unemployed knights offered their services to wronged women, fighting their accusers for a fee. The ethical implications of professional judicial combatants seem lost on medieval legal minds, focused more on procedure than justice. The most infamous case involved Marie de Corbie, who accused 3 men of murdering her husband. When they demanded combat, she hired a notorious sellsword who systematically destroyed all 3 in a single afternoon, collecting his fee between bouts. The fact that he was later revealed to have actually murdered her husband himself rather undermines the divine judgment aspect. But the legal precedent stood. Sometimes women fought each other, Master Edmund adds, showing you an illustration of 2 women pulling each other's hair while wielding what appear to be modified grain flails, usually over inheritance or accusations of witchcraft. These fights followed standard rules, except both combatants had to wear special white shifts that tore easily, ostensibly to show blood, but probably for the crowd's entertainment. The church's position on female combat wavers between outright prohibition and grudging acceptance. Some bishops declared women too weak to be proper vessels for God's judgment, while others argued that divine will transcends gender. The theological debates fill volumes, mostly written by men who'd never seen any combat, much less the specialized nightmare of mixed gender dueling. My favorite, Master Edmund says with disturbing glee, is the Burgundian variation where the woman could choose between combat and having her accuser fight her champion while she threw rocks at him from a platform. This seems less like judicial process and more like elaborate revenge theater, but apparently it satisfied legal requirements for participation without direct combat. The training methods for these unusual fights were themselves peculiar. Women practiced with weighted sleeves to build arm strength for swinging their cloth-wrapped rocks. Men trained to fight while kneeling to simulate the pit restriction. Some entrepreneurial combat masters specialized in these preparations, charging premium rates for their expertise in theoretical violence. You ask about outcomes, and Master Edmund's expression grows thoughtful. The records suggest women won about as often as they lost, though winning might mean simply surviving with maiming rather than death. He shows you a court roll describing a woman who broke her opponent's arm so badly the bone protruded, technically achieving victory, but spending her remaining years caring for the man she'd crippled because Christian charity demanded it. The property disputes requiring female combat were often inheritance based, where women defended their dowry rights against male relatives. One memorable case involved two sisters fighting over their father's mill, using the traditional slings, while their families took bets on the outcome. They eventually collapsed from exhaustion without drawing blood, leading the judge to award the mill to the church out of sheer frustration. The last recorded instance in England was 1467, Master Edmund concludes, closing his manuscript carefully. Lady Catherine Burnell fought her nephew over manor rights. She won by the clever expedient of bribing his armorer to loosen crucial straps, causing his protection to fall off mid-combat. This seems like cheating, but apparently fell within the broad medieval definition of God helping those who help themselves. The entire system reveals medieval law's awkward attempt to provide equal access to justice while maintaining that women were fundamentally different creatures requiring special rules. The resulting compromises satisfied no one, but provided spectacular entertainment and legal precedents that lawyers still debate when they're bored and slightly drunk. The social hierarchies of medieval England manifest most visibly in the weapons permitted for judicial combat between different classes. As you convalesce, various visitors share stories that illuminate this bizarre system where your birth determines not just how you live, but specifically how you're allowed to try killing someone who's wronged you. The rules seem designed by someone with both a dark sense of humor and an obsession with minute social distinctions. Peasants get clubs, explains old Willem, who survived 3 duels despite being born to a family of dung collectors. Not even good clubs, mind you, has to be oak or ash, no longer than your arm from elbow to fingertip, no metal bands or studs. He shows you his favorite, a gnarled piece of wood that's seen better decades. Course, the trick is choosing wood with natural knots right where they'll do the most damage. And the club fights between commoners are brutal affairs, lacking the precision of swords or the efficiency of axes. Willem describes his last combat, 2 men beating each other like they're threshing particularly stubborn wheat, blood and teeth flying with each impact. No armor is allowed for peasants, just their daily clothes and whatever padding they can improvise from stolen rags. The mortality rate is actually lower than noble combat, mainly because exhaustion sets in before fatal damage accumulates. Now, merchants, Willem continues with obvious disdain, they get to use staffs, proper quarterstaffs, sometimes even iron shod. The merchant class occupies that awkward middle ground, too rich for clubs, but not noble enough for swords. Their combats resemble violent dancing, all spinning wood and footwork. One infamous bout lasted 4 hours because both merchants had hired the same fighting master and knew each other's moves perfectly. Your brother-in-law Martin, who's been researching precedents obsessively since your combat, shares more exotic variations. In London, fishmongers fight with gaff hooks, butchers get cleavers, tanners use their stretching hooks. Each guild apparently lobbied for weapons related to their trade, creating a system where your profession might determine your survival. The Cordwainers Guild petitioned to use awls, but were denied on grounds that stabbing implements were too noble adjacent. Priests, Martin adds with relish, technically can't spill blood, so they use maces. This theological loophole that crushing someone's skull is somehow less violent than cutting them exemplifies medieval logic at its finest. Clerical combat is rare but spectacular, usually involving property disputes between monasteries that escalate beyond prayer and politics. The last recorded instance involved two abbots fighting over fishing rights while their monks placed extremely unchristian wagers. The strangest case he's found involves a dispute between a knight and a merchant where they couldn't agree on weapons. The compromise: the knight got his sword but had to fight on his knees, while the merchant got a ladder, not to climb, to swing. The combat lasted exactly one exchange before both parties realized the absurdity and settled out of court, though not before the merchant got in one good ladder shot that left the knight concussed and confused. Jews have their own rules, Martin says, lowering his voice despite being in your own home. The Jewish community, when forced into combat, could use weapons but faced restrictions on timing, no fights on Christian holidays or their own Sabbath, creating scheduling nightmares. One case dragged on for months because every proposed date conflicted with someone's religious obligations, until both parties died of old age and their children inherited the dispute. Foreign merchants present another complication. Venetians insist on using their traditional daggers, Hansards demand axes like their ancestors, and the French want rapiers that won't be properly invented for another century. The resulting negotiations sometimes last longer than the actual combats, with translators arguing about weapon specifications in 4 languages while the combatants glare at each other across cultural and linguistic divides. My cousin in York, Willem interjects, saw a fight between a nobleman and a yeoman. The noble got full armor and a sword, but the yeoman got a billhook and permission to fight dirty. This attempt at balancing social disparity through tactical advantages rarely works as intended. The yeoman in question hooked the knight's helmet off and beat him unconscious with it, technically winning, but earning exile for embarrassing the aristocracy. The weapons themselves tell stories of their social stations. Noble swords bear makers' marks, decorated pommels, sometimes even names and genealogies etched in the fuller. Merchant staves might have brass caps or ownership marks burned into the wood. Peasant clubs are usually just peasant clubs, though some families pass down particularly effective specimens with whispered advice about grain alignment and balance points. Worst I heard, Martin says, producing yet another legal text, was the Nottingham case where they couldn't determine the defendant's exact social status. The man was possibly a bastard noble, definitely a merchant, but also owned land like a yeoman. The weapon negotiations lasted 3 days before settling on a compromise. He could use a sword, but it had to be made of wood. He lost, predictably, but the legal precedent still confuses lawyers. Women across all social classes face their own weapon restrictions. Noble ladies who can't find champions might use knives, but only ones suitable for dining. Common women get the same clubs as their male counterparts, but shortened for propriety. One memorable case involved a fishwife who argued successfully that her scaling knife counted as a tool of trade, then used it to devastating effect on a baker who'd cheated her on bread weights. The enforcement of these rules varies wildly by region. Northern lords tend toward practicality. If both parties agree to weapons, they'll allow it. Southern courts insist on strict adherence to social hierarchy, measuring clubs to ensure compliance and checking family genealogies to determine sword rights. London has its own system entirely, involving a complex points calculation based on wealth, profession, ancestry, and whether you've ever met the king. Course, Willem concludes philosophically. End of the day, dead is dead, whether it's from a nobleman's sword or a peasant's stick. He's right, but the elaborate system of weapon segregation continues, a perfect metaphor for medieval society. Everyone's equal before God, but some are more equal than others, and that inequality extends to the specific ways you're allowed to achieve divinely sanctioned murder. The sun sits low on the horizon as you make your way through the town square 3 days after the combat, your body still protesting with each movement. The bruises have ripened to spectacular purples and yellows, creating a map of violence across your skin that your wife insists on treating with foul-smelling poultices. But you're alive, mobile, and legally vindicated, which is more than many can say after judicial combat. The funeral preparations for those less fortunate than you provide today's somber entertainment. Not for Thomas, he's recovering as well, though you passed his wife at the market and she looked through you like you were made of morning mist. No, today they bury Roger of Thornfield, who lost his duel last month over a disputed marriage contract and took 4 days to die from a perforated bowel. Medieval justice grinds slowly, but exceeds thoroughly in its finality. Father Benedict presides over the burial rites with the weariness of a man who's performed too many. We commit our brother Roger to the earth, trusting in God's mercy to receive his soul despite the judgment rendered against him through combat. The theological gymnastics required to reconcile Christian burial with judicial execution create fascinating contradictions that everyone politely ignores. The widow stands rigid in borrowed black. Actual mourning clothes are expensive, and Roger died with substantial debts. She'll have to vacate their cottage by week's end, the property reverting to his opponent, along with everything else Roger staked on God favoring his cause. Their children cluster around her skirts, too young to understand why their father is in a box and their uncle won't stop crying. The compensation payments begin next month, Martin whispers, ever the legal scholar. Medieval law recognizes that killing someone, even legally, creates obligations. Roger's opponent must pay the widow a small pension for 3 years, assuming he can afford it after his own legal costs. It's blood money dressed up as Christian charity, barely enough to prevent starvation, but sufficient to claim moral superiority. The grave diggers work with practiced efficiency, having prepared the plot in the section reserved for judicial casualties, not quite the consecrated ground of natural deaths, but not the crossroads burial of suicides either. Another legal compromise, another reminder that medieval society runs on elaborate distinctions that matter intensely until you're dead, at which point they just seem petty. You recognize several faces in the crowd: men who've survived their own combats, women who've lost husbands or sons to the system, children who'll grow up knowing their inheritance was decided by who swung a weapon better on a particular morning. The shared experience creates an odd community of veterans and victims, all bound by their intersection with legally sanctioned violence. Remember the Ashford triple duel, someone mentions, referring to the legendary case where three brothers fought three others over mining rights. All six died within a week, leaving two sets of widows to sort out the original dispute through conventional law courts. The story serves as both cautionary tale and dark comedy, depending on how much ale the teller has consumed. The burial feast follows at the tavern, where Roger's friends attempt to drink his memory into something more heroic than it was. You attend out of obligation. Refusing would suggest shame about the system that validated your own cause. The ale tastes of guilt and relief in equal measures as men share combat stories that grow more elaborate with each telling. He fought well. Someone lies about Roger, who actually spent most of his duel trying to run away before his opponent cornered him against the boundary stakes. But the dead deserve kindness in their stories, if not their lives. So everyone nods and agrees that yes, Roger showed great courage right until that warhammer caved in his skull. The property transfers happen with unseemly haste. Roger's opponent, a wool merchant named Clement, already has men surveying the disputed warehouse that sparked the whole affair. By next week, Roger's family mark will be chiseled off the doorpost and replaced with Clement's. The goods inside, wool bales worth more than most men see in a lifetime, now belong to the victor by right of combat. It's not right, Roger's brother says loudly enough for everyone to hear. Trial by combat's nothing but murder wrapped in law. He's drunk enough to voice what others think, but sober enough to avoid direct challenges. Someone guides him outside before he says something actionable, because the last thing anyone needs is another duel spawned from the funeral of the previous one. The conversation turns to reforms some lords are proposing: professional champions for all parties, combat replaced by oath swearing, even, radically, letting judges decide based on evidence rather than who bleeds first. These ideas meet the reception all progressive thinking receives in medieval England: polite interest, theological concern, and immediate burial under centuries of tradition. My grandfather remembered when they tried banning combat in the Shire. Old Willem contributes. Lasted about as long as snow in July. First major dispute. Both parties demanded their ancient rights, and the lords gave in rather than face rebellion. The system persists not because it works, but because replacing it requires admitting centuries of juridical murder might have been unnecessary. You leave as the sun sets, walking slowly through streets where shutters close at your passing. Some neighbors nod respectfully. You won, after all, while others turn away. Thomas's cousins glare from a doorway, but make no move. The peace of exhaustion holds for now, though everyone knows this resolves nothing permanently. Your sons will inherit your expanded lands, and Thomas's grievance equally. At home, your wife helps you remove your boots, a simple task made complex by stiffness and swelling. The sheep won't care about boundaries. She observes with the practical wisdom that makes you love her. They'll graze where the grass grows best, same as always. She's right, of course. The elaborate legal theater, the violence, the death and maiming, all for lines on maps that livestock ignore. The candle burns low as you lie in bed, listening to night sounds, your children breathing in the next room, rats in the thatch, the distant bell marking curfew. Your body aches with each heartbeat, reminding you of every blow taken and given, but you're alive, legally vindicated, and marginally wealthier in lands you'll probably dispute again within a generation. Tomorrow brings its own challenges: harvest preparations, tax assessments, the endless cycle of medieval agricultural life. Your fight with Thomas already fades into local legend, details shifting with each retelling. By winter, it'll be a story for tavern nights. By next year, your grandsons will play at being you and Thomas, wooden swords clacking while they argue about who gets to win. The system endures because it provides what medieval society craves: clear resolution, divine involvement, and public spectacle. That it also produces widows, orphans, and men like you, lying awake cataloging wounds while wondering if 17 sheep justified in any of this. Well, justice has always been messy. At least yours came with survival. The stars wheel overhead, invisible through the roof, but constant in their judgment. Somewhere, Thomas probably lies awake too, touching his own wounds, planning future grievances, or perhaps just grateful, like you, to see another dawn. The wheel of medieval justice turns on, grinding its participants fine, but you've slipped through its gears for now. Tomorrow you'll rise, tend your expanded lands, and pretend the price was worth paying. Some nights, you might even believe it. Now you drift deeper into the waiting darkness, your breathing slowing to match the rhythm of distant church bells marking Compline. The sharp edges of the day's memories soften like morning frost in sunlight, all those clashing weapons and legal arguments fading into a gentle hum of half-remembered words. Your body grows heavier with each breath, sinking into the straw mattress as if the earth itself is drawing you down into peaceful rest. The aches and pains that marked your journey through medieval justice transform into a strange warmth, spreading from your chest outward like honey mead on a winter evening. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its serenade, notes floating through the darkness like silver coins tossed into a still pond. The sound mingles with your slowing heartbeat, creating a lullaby older than any law or custom. Your eyelids flutter closed, and behind them dance not scenes of combat, but fields of swaying grain, endless and golden under a harvest moon. The voices of the past grow quieter now, all those lawyers and priests and fighters blending into a murmur no louder than wind through summer leaves. Even the weight of armor becomes just a memory of pressure, gentle as a blanket tucked by loving hands. You float between waking and sleeping, between the harsh medieval world and the soft embrace of dreams. Let the morning bring its own troubles. For now, there is only this: the quiet darkness, the steady draw of breath, the blessed absence of steel and judgment. Sleep claims you gently, carrying you far from dueling grounds and legal precedents into a place where the only law is rest. Sweet dreams, gentle listener. May your own rest be untroubled by the echoes of ancient conflicts, and may you wake refreshed, grateful for a world where disputes end in words, not weapons.